going to start. Before beginning the third part of the lecture, I want to come back on something I had written yesterday. So at some point, I brought a characterization of toposes as categories which have the same basic properties as a category of sets. So I had written 4 properties which were enough to characterize toposes. So the existence of arbitrary small limits, co-limits, the existence of images whose formation commute with bed change, and the existence of small generating families. But in fact, in the conditions, I had forgotten something. So in condition 2, I forgot the fact that quotients of equivalence relations, which of course exist because there are particular cases of co-limits, so these quotients should commute with base change. So I had forgotten that, and in fact, some of you immediately thought about the example of the category of abelian groups, which verify these 4 properties except for this condition. So the category of abelian groups is not a topos because it does not respect this condition. So it was very good to think about this example, which immediately showed something was missing. So it is a pleasure when students react in such a way. So thank you very much. Okay, so today I want to lecture on the presentation of toposes by theories, by first-order theories. So once again, I stress the fact that the toposes I'm going to talk about today are exactly the same as the geometric toposes we have been talking.
What is equivalence relation?
No, an equivalence relation, it means, so you have an object, okay? And an equivalence relation is a sub-object of the product of the object with itself, which verifies the usual properties of equivalence relation. So it means it is symmetric, it contains a diagonal, and it is transitive. Okay, and then there is a quotient. Okay. In fact, today we shall see the interpretation of first-order theories in arbitrary toposes. And in fact, the theory of equivalence relations is a first-order theory. So, in some sense, this is a very particular case of what I am going to talk about today, the fact that it is possible to talk about models of first-order theories in any topos, in particular models of the theory of equivalence relations in an arbitrary toposes. Okay, so today I want to talk about this question, the semantic interpretation of theories in toposes, or sometimes in more general categories. So first I need to introduce in quite precise terms what we mean by a first-order theory. So yesterday I said that the first-order theory consists in 2 types of things. First, a language, which is called by logicians not a language but a signature, and secondly, a family of axioms. So first, we need to introduce what we mean by a first-order language. So a first-order language consists in possibly 3 types of objects. So first, there are what the logicians call sorts. So in order to understand what it means, they are just names of objects. So for instance, when we talk about groups, usually we say, let G be a group. So G is the name of the group you want to talk about. So this is just a name for the type of objects we want to talk about. So the second type of objects are called by logicians symbols of functions, or what could also say names of functions. So in the case of groups, I said yesterday, there are three such names, one name for multiplication, one name for the inverse map, and one name for the unit element. So in general, symbol of function is something which will be written in this way, A1, AN, to B, okay? So here, the letters A1, AN, and B are sorts. They are names of objects. And what does such a notation mean? It means that when you will interpret it, it will become a morphism from a product of n objects corresponding to the sorts A1, AN to another object corresponding to the sort B. Okay? And of course, it may happen that here some sorts appear several times, exactly as here. Okay? It may also happen that here n is equal to 0. And this is called the symbol of constants. Here we have an example. This is the unit element. So when we will interpret it in categories, this will be the final object of the category, the product over the empty indexing set. Okay? And the last type of symbols are the so-called symbols of relations, such as, for instance, equivalence relations, or order relations, or partial order relations. So what is a symbol of relation? It is something which will be interpreted as a sub-object in a product. Okay? So, for instance, an order relation or an equivalence relation, it is something in a product of the type AA. Okay, you have two copies of the same sort. Okay, it may also happen that here n is equal to 0. So this means you will consider sub-object of the final object, which in fact in toposes can be very interesting. For instance, when you have the topos associated to a topological space, every open subset of your topological space defines a sub-object of the final object of the topos. So it is very interesting. And in fact, in these theories, in particular, you will have theories without any sorts, without any functions, only with symbol of relations. So this is interesting, in fact. Okay, so this is the first part of the definition of a theory. By now, in order to define a theory, we need to introduce axioms. So axioms consist in a choice of formulas which you want to be verified. So we need to specify what we mean by a formula. Okay, so here there is a list of definition. So let's consider such a signature sigma. And by now, I want to introduce what logicians means by the word formula. So, okay, so this is in the context of such a signature sigma. And it also has to be said as an introduction that in order to state what is a formula, we choose an infinite set of variables indexed by the sorts. So this means that for each sort, we have an infinite set of variables indexed by this sort. Okay, this is just a notation which will allow us to write formulas. Okay, we just choose variables. So for instance, you are used to write equations with letters x, y, z, and so on. and this is exactly what we do here. We just choose a big enough set of letters which will allow us to write formulas. Okay, so by now the first part of the definition consists in defining what we called by terms. So a term is an expression of the following form. You consider a symbol of function. Okay, so for instance here, this is a symbol of function in the sorts a1, an, and here you introduce variables. Of course, the variables are indexed by the sorts which corresponds to the defining sort of the symbol. Okay, to the domain, the domain sorts of the symbol. Okay, so this is the first type of the terms we consider, but not only that, because we also allow substitution. So what does it mean? It means that when we have such a term, for instance, suppose that one of the variables is indexed by b, then we can substitute the variable indexed by b by this symbol here. Okay, so this is just a composition of function symbols. Okay, and as the function symbols in general have several variables, we can substitute some of the variables and not the other variables. So I am just, we are just considering in a general way what we do all the time in mathematics. In mathematics, all the time we make such type of substitutions. And here, what we mean by a term is anything we can get in this way by substitution. So it is defined inductively. Okay? So this is defined inductively. We allow for an arbitrary finite number of substitutions. Okay? Once we have defined terms, we can define what we mean by formulas. So here, it has to be said that logicians distinguish several types of formulas. So the first type of formulas are so-called atomic formulas. How are they obtained? You simply allow substitution of terms in relation symbols plus the equality relation. Okay, so you see in the definition of the terms, the symbols of relations did not appear at all. Okay, here we allow to substitute in the relation symbol. So you see when you have such a symbol, it is understood as a subobject, as a relation in the variables of a1, an. So you may make a substitution. It has a meaning formally. So at the present moment, everything we do is purely formal. This is just a way to write sentences using the basic words of the language. Okay? So here we just allow for substitution of the terms in the relation symbols and possibly also the equality relation. The equality relation, of course, is a subobject in AA for any sort A of the language. Okay, so this is the first type of formulas we allow, the very simple types, and then there are much more general types of formulas. So the most general is the general first order formulas. So how is it defined. It is defined inductively. Defined inductively from atomic formulas using the following thing. First, we allow ourselves to use the symbol, this symbol, which means true. We also allow this symbol, which means false. We allow this symbol, which means conjunctions. So when we want several formulas to be verified at the same time. So this is conjunctions, and conjunctions may be finite or infinite. If it is infinite, I use the same letter, but with a bigger script. Okay? You also have disjunctions, which means or. So this is written in this way if it is finite, and in this way if it is infinite. Okay? By now, we can also use this symbol, which is the existence symbol, the so-called existence quantifier. This is the universal quantifier. Of course, you are all used to these operations. In mathematics, we use all the time this type of symbol. There is also the symbol of implication. And lastly, the symbol of negation. So when, for instance, in the context of sets, it will be interpreted as taking the complement.
Isn't negation just implies false?
No, negation is something different. So when you have a property, so for instance, a property is to be understood as a sub-object in some product, and the negation means taking the complement.
But the complement is
The negation of this property.
the complement in topos, as far as I understand, is exactly implication of false. So you can rewrite negation in terms of
Yeah, okay, no, you're right. You're right. You are referring, of course. No, so in the context of topos, yeah, but here you are saying this means you already know a lot, because this has to be understood as implication of, in fact, not false, but empty. Is a sub-object corresponding to the, yeah. Okay, but this is This is for people who already know logic. If you don't know logic, just you see the symbols you use here are symbols you are familiar with, except possibly for this symbol, the negation symbol. But you immediately understand what it means to take the complement of a subset of a set. Okay, so starting from atomic formulas, you can combine them using this type of logical symbols. Okay, so this is a general notion of first-order formulas. For instance, if you want to define, let's say, to formalize the notion of field, what will you say? You will say, for instance, that for any x, you want either x equals 0 or x as an inverse. So how will it written? It will be written as this true implies. So in a few minutes we will write it in a more symbolic way, but by now true implies either x equals 0 or there exists an y and there exists y such that x, y equal 1. Okay, so this is to define the theory of fields starting from the axioms of rings. Okay, so you see that here we use this type of symbols.
So this implies can be used only once in the syntax of an axiom, right?
Yeah.
This is just used once.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the general notion of first order formulas, but yeah, this is wet. Yeah. But there are also some smaller families of formulas which may be useful. For us, the most useful notion will be the notion of geometric formulas, because this is the type of formulas which will allow us to define classifying toposes of theories. So geometric formulas are defined inductively from atomic formulas, but the list of axioms of symbols which are allowed in phrasing these formulas is shorter. So you certainly have true, you have false, you have arbitrary, you have finite conjunctions, be careful, finite conjunctions, not infinite conjunctions, okay? You allow for infinite disjunctions. You also allow the existence quantifier, but you don't allow this quantifier, you don't allow this symbol, and you don't allow negation. Okay, so yeah, there is a shorter list of symbols. So when a theory can be expressed using only these symbols, it will be called geometric. So I will say in 2 minutes exactly what it means. Okay. Another maybe here I can make a remark. When here I don't allow for arbitrary disjunctions, but only for finite disjunctions, so you see it is a little more restrictive, then the corresponding formulas will be called coherent. Okay, in fact this is important because most logicians usually work with theories where they only allow for finite conjunctions and disjunctions. Even though, from the point of view of toposes, this is just as good as that. So, and in fact, it is very useful to have this. I think it is, at least for us, it is better to consider the geometric notion. But here, I just make the remark that most logicians usually work with finite theories where you only allow for finite conjunctions as well as finite disjunctions as well as finite conjunctions. And the last notion I want to introduce, because in fact we will need it at some point, is the notion of regular formulas. In regular formulas, you allow for the true symbol, you don't allow the false symbol, you allow finite conjunctions, and you allow the existence quantifier, but you don't allow disjunctions, even finite disjunctions. So, for instance, in particular, algebraic theories are of this type. So, for instance, just think about the theory of vector spaces, for instance, or modules over a ring. So, it certainly has a meaning to consider the intersection of a family of subspaces, of submodules. It has a meaning, it is still a submodel or a sublinear space. But you cannot take the union. Okay? This is why you don't allow for this symbol. Okay, you see when you concretely when you consider equations in linear algebra, you may combine equations. You may say I want the linear equations f1, f2, f3 to be verified, but you never say I want either f1 or f2 or f3 because of course it is no more linear. Okay. So this is why this notion of regular logic is also important. You see, okay. So the last notion we need in relation with that is the notion of context. So a context is a set of variables which contains the variables of the formulas you look at. Okay, so for instance, if you consider a function f of x, it also has a meaning to consider it as a function not only of x, but of xy, for instance. Okay, or yes? Yes. Yeah, no, so this is the good remark. So this means that from the point of view of logic, the theory of field is not an algebraic theory. So, no, but you are completely right. This is, okay. Okay. So I was talking about the context. So, for instance, you see when I wrote the symbol true here, there is no variable at all. But of course, I want to allow the true symbol in relation with n variables, x1, x2, xn. So what does it mean? It means that if your variables are associated to sorts a1, a2, an, that it means that in A1 cross and so on cross AN, you are considering the first sub-object, the maximal sub-object consisting of everything. Okay? And as has already been said, the false sub-object is always the empty sub-object, the initial sub-object, considered as a sub-object of some product, which means implicitly you are considering a set of variables, which may be bigger than the variables which appear explicitly in your formulas. Okay. Okay, so this is the general notion of theory. And so this is what I called yesterday syntax. Oh, yes, excuse me, I didn't finish. I have forgotten something. Because here I explain what is a formula, but not yet what is a theory. So in order to define a theory, we need to define first, so this is, we need to define third what logicians call the second. So a second is just an implication. So what it is that you consider two formulas as we have defined. So let's call them phi and psi. So two formulas in the same context, and a second is just an implication in this context. So it is written in this way. So you see there is this strange symbol, which means implication. Okay? And what you want is formula phi to imply formula psi in the context X. So here the context X is a family of variables which contains all variables which appear explicitly in the formulas phi and psi. And the second is just an implication between these formulas. So at the present moment, this also is purely formal writing. And lastly, what is a theory? A first-order theory, T. So it consists in two things. First, a signature, sigma, and then a set of sequence which are called the axioms of the theory. Okay, you just choose a list which may be finite or infinite. You just choose a list of sequence of implications which you call the axioms of the theory. Okay, so okay, so of course there are different types of theories depending on the types of formulas you allow in the axioms. So if you consider general first-order axioms, then you get general first-order theory. Okay, but it also has a meaning to consider more specifically the so-called geometric theories. So what is a geometric theory? It is a theory whose axioms consist in sequence where all the formulas which appear in the sequence are geometric. Okay? So you see that this symbol means an implication. So you certainly have an implication between the formulas, but you don't allow for this symbol in the formula, inside the formulas. And okay. And we can also talk about coherent theories. So this is when the axioms only allow for finite disjunctions. And we can talk about regular theories. This is when the formulas only use a true symbol, the finite conjunctions, and the existence symbol. Okay? So you may wonder what it means that is it possible to phrase as a sequence the fact that a formula has to be verified? The answer is yes. How to phrase the fact that a formula has to be verified? It is phrased in the following way. You want true to imply phi. So this means that formula phi has to be verified by everywhere.
So you also allow free variables, so you don't need.
Yeah, I allow for free I allow for free variables.
So you don't need a universal quantifier to say that for all.
Yeah, no. That is exactly. I allow for free variables. So this implication maybe in this context. So for instance, I had written the axiom to define fields. So by now we can write them in the more technically in the following way. True implies in the variable x equals 0, or there exists y such that xy equals 1. Okay, so here I have written the axioms, which means that a commutating ring, which is already given to you, will be a field. Okay, so by now, we want to talk about semantics. Or we could even say categorical semantics. So first, let's consider such a first-order signature, sigma, and consider category C, which has finite products and finite products Yeah, and in fact, it will be enough for us. So then, only with this hypothesis, we see that it is possible to talk about interpreting our signature sigma in the context of such a category. So this is the notion of sigma structure in this category C. What is a sigma structure? It is a function which associates to any sort A an object of the category, which can be denoted in this way, MA. Here the letter M is for model. Okay? To any function symbols, A1, AN, to B, it associates an arrow which goes from MA1 cross MAN to NB. Okay, it has a meaning because we said that in this category there are products. And thirdly, when you have a relation symbol, okay, it has to associate to that a subobject MR of MA1 cross MAN. So any sigma structure in the category C is such a function. Of course, I am not saying there is only one of them. There are many of them. Okay, so by now we want to say that when we have a formula phi of the signature sigma in the context of a family of variable x1, a1, xn, an, and we have chosen such a sigma structure, then we want to interpret phi in the model M as a subobject of MA1 cross MAN. Okay, what we are considering is just the subobject of this product, which is defined by the formula phi. We are used to this. When you have a formula in a family of variables, then this formula defines a subobject of the whole object, which is the word in which you are working. Okay, so in order to do this, we need to interpret the different symbol we are using. Of course, we can see first that terms are interpretable because terms are defined by substitution. By substitution is just composition of arrows. And in categories, we certainly have composition of arrows. So terms are interpretable. Okay, there is no problem for this. Then there are atomic formulas. So for atomic formulas, you want to substitute terms into relations. And relations are subobject. So what is such a substitution? It is just taking the pullback. Okay, if you have such a subobject MR, in a product, MA1, MAN. And here you have MB1 cross MBN. Here an euro, MF, which is associated, which is defined by substitution of variables into symbol functions. Okay, what you want to take is the pullback. So this means that in order for this to be defined, you need your category to have well-defined pullbacks, which means you need your category to have finite limits, finite projective limits. Okay, so you want, here we have the interpretation of that. Then you have to interpret the different symbols we have written. So, of course, the symbol true means the whole subobject. If you are in the context M1 cross A1 cross A2 cross AN, so this means the subobject of MA1 cross MAN, which is the whole thing, the maximal subobject. This is the minimal subobject. So this means that in your category, you want as an initial object. Okay? By now, you have finite or infinite conjunctions. So, of course, you will interpret that as intersections. So this means that in your category, you need intersections, which are another type of limits. So you ask your category to verify, to have finite or infinite limits. And of course, you remark that all the properties we are listing are verified by Topos. So in Topos, there is no problem for interpreting all of this. The same for finite or infinite conjunctions. We want unions, finite unions of subobjects or infinite unions of subobjects to be well defined. And this is certainly the case in Topos. By now, we want the existential quantifiers to be interpretable. So existential quantifiers always consist in, always apply to variables. So what is the context? The context is that you have three variables, which means the variables which do not enter in the quantification, and you have extra variables. So here I copy again the variables, and then I have other variables, MB1 cross MBK, okay? And then you can consider the projection of this morphism onto that morphism. And suppose here you have a subobject defined by a formula, then we want to be able to take the image. And this is the interpretation of that. So here, what I have written here is exactly the existential quantifier on the variable y1 b1 yk bk. Okay, and what is called free variables are the variables which do not enter in the existential quantifiers. Okay, what we are doing is a partial projection. We project along part of the variables and not on the other variables. So this is what we have done in the case of field. You see here, the quantifier is on y, it is not on x. Okay, so here, in fact, we have already said what are the interpretations for all these symbols. In fact, when you are in the context of Topos, it is also possible to interpret these symbols. But in fact, we will not need it because we will consider geometric theories. So, okay, so by now, every time we have a geometric formula, and a sigma structure M in a category with all these properties, in particular in a topos, then we can interpret this formula as a subobject in the product corresponding of the to the variable in the context X of phi. Okay, we have this, and by now we can say what is a model of a theory. So what is a model of a theory? You have a theory T in the context sigma, and you have a category with all the properties you need, in particular a topos. And by now we are considering a sigma structure M. You see, so the notion of sigma structure only depends on the signature. It does not depend on the theory. Okay? But by now you want such a sigma structure to be a model of T in the category C or in the topos E. So what does it mean? It means that for any sequent which is an axiom of the theory, you can do the following. You interpret the first formula in the first formula in the sigma structure M. You interpret the second formula in the sigma structure M. And what you want to be verified is the fact that the first interpretation is contained into the second interpretation. So when, for any axiom of the theory, this inclusion is verified, you say your sigma structure is a model of the theory. And it has a meaning, so all of this has a meaning in an arbitrary topos. So for instance, you can think about any, for instance, so just a few minutes ago, we talked about the meaning of equivalence relation in a topos. So the theory of equivalence relations is certainly a first-order theory. In this theory, there is only one sort, okay, one relation symbol and no function symbol. And there are three axioms, which are the fact it is symmetric, it contains a diagonal, and it is transitive. There are three axioms. Okay, and all of this is a geometric theory. It has a meaning in an arbitrary topos or even more general categories. But the same for group. So I think many people here are used to group objects in, of course, many categories, including toposes. But the same for rings. You see, usually in algebraic geometry, we are always working with so-called ringed toposes. So what it is a topos together with an inner ring, which means a model of the theory of rings inside this topos. And when you have done that, you are considering models over this ring in the topos. So this is a model of the theory of models over a ring in the context of such a topos. Okay, on the same, but it also has a meaning. In fact, this is more unusual to consider a model of the theory of field in a topos. This is a geometric theory. Even, but as I said yesterday, it even has a meaning to talk about models of the theory of arbitrary first-order theories in an arbitrary topos. Okay, so by now you may wonder why we introduce this notion of geometric theory, not general, why we don't consider arbitrary first-order theories. So this is for the following reason. So suppose you have such a signature sigma and such a theory T, and so to an arbitrary topos, you can, or even more general categories, you can associate the category of models of T in E, which of course is a full subcategory of the category of sigma structures in E. The morphisms are the same. But of course, a sigma structure is not in general a model, but as soon as you have two models, their sigma structure or the morphism relating them as models are the same as the morphism relating them as sigma structures. So this is a full subcategory. So you have that, and by now, of course, we are interested to morphism of toposes. Okay, so here we have also the category of models of E prime of T in the category E prime. And yesterday I already told you that if the category, if the theory T is geometric, then there is an induced morphism in the other direction. So this is induced by the pullback morphism. So this is if T is a geometric theory. This is the place where we need our theory to be geometric. So why do we need this hypothesis? This is because this type of symbols are exactly the symbols which commute with pullback by morphism of toposes. Okay, so we know that this functor, the pullback functor, is compatible with arbitrary colimits and finite limits. So the fact it commutes with arbitrary colimits will mean in particular that we are allowed to consider arbitrary unions. But we said it is compatible only with finite limits, and this is the reason why we allow only for finite conjunctions, not infinite conjunctions. Okay, so by now you understand why infinite the disjunctions are allowed, because there are limits, and f upper star commutes with arbitrary limits, whereas arbitrary colimits, excuse me, whereas it only commutes with finite limits, in particular with finite intersections. Okay, so by now we have this fact that when we consider such a geometric theory, it induces a functor on the two category of toposes. In fact, a two functor on the two category of toposes. Okay, and by now I can state again the theorem I had stated yesterday. Which, in my opinion, is a wonderful one, really extremely important theorem. So this is the following. You consider T an arbitrary geometric theory, and then the functor which to E associates the T models, the category of T models of E, is representable with the usual notion of representable functors. So what does it mean? It means that there exists a so-called classifying topos E Et of T, classifying topos Et of T, which represents this functor. So it means the following. It means that for any topos, to consider a T model of E is the same thing as to consider a morphism from E to the classifying topos. In particular, to consider a set theoretic models of T is the same thing as to consider a morphism from the topos of sets to ET. So this is a point, the category of points of ET. Of course, you are used to the fact that when you have an object, a geometric object, which is defined by saying that it represents a functor, then there is an associated universal object, which corresponds to the identity morphism of the classifying object. So you say, here you consider in particular the morphism of ET to itself, and of course in this category there is a particular element which is the identity morphism. And so according to this equivalence, to the identity morphism of ET should correspond some UT which is a model of T in ET. So what it is the so-called universal model of the theory T. Concretely, what does it mean? It means the following. Consider a model M, model of T in an arbitrary topos. So for instance, set theoretic models. Usually we are interested in set theoretic model. And according to this theorem, we have an induced morphism from E to the classifying topos. Okay, and what do we have? We have that the model here is equal to the transform of the universal model by Kullback. So in particular, of course, the most appealing case is the case of sets. You consider a set theoretic model. So for instance, suppose you are interested in the theory of groups. So what is a set theoretic model? It is a group in the usual sense. Consider a group. And here you have a unique morphism from sets to ET. So what it means, it is a point of the topos, such that your group is the fiber of this universal group object at this point. So this means here all groups become a family. You have no more groups which are separated one from the other, because when we think about groups, we think about something which is very discrete. Okay? We don't have the feeling there is a continuous structure. But here, in fact, we see that there is a topos. The topos is a topological object. And on this topos, there is a universal group, such that the fibers of this group at all possible points are all possible groups. Okay, so this theorem has been proved approximately in 1955. In fact, many people were involved in the proof. The first example, before the general theory was given, appeared in the thesis of Monique Hakim, who was a student of Grothendieck. And it was remarked by logicians, and they tried to generalize that. And in fact, in several steps, they succeeded up to arriving at the notion of geometric theory on this general theorem. So many people were involved. So Loweir, I already named Loweir yesterday. Loweir played a key role. But there were also young people at the time, such as Joyal, Mackay, Reyes, I think Cole, Benabou, I am not even sure the list is complete. So many people were involved. The result was, the general result was published for the first time in a book by Mackay and Reyes. So most of these people belong to the Montreal School of Categorical Logic in Quebec. Okay, so we have this general theorem. Okay, and maybe I can give some hints on the way it is proved. So how it is proved? In fact, it is proved in a completely constructive way. So it is one of the marveling points of this theory that everything is constructive. So here you see we need to introduce a topos. We want to construct a topos verifying this property. And how did we define toposes? We define toposes as associated to sites. So in fact, here, what we are going to do, I will explain it very quickly, but at least give the main ideas. We are going to explain that in order to define this topos, we explicitly introduce some site, which is a defining site of the topos. So the topos ET, the clarifying topos of such a geometric theory, is associated to a site. So a site consists in a category together with a topology. So this is called the syntactic category, and this is called the syntactic topology. So this is a Grothendieck topology on this category. Okay, so I want to say very quickly how this category is constructed. So we need to construct this. So this means we need to specify what are the objects, what are the arrows, and what we mean by a covering family of morphism. And it will be done. So first the objects of the syntactic category. So what are they? They are just formulas. When I say formulas, here I mean geometric formulas. Phi in the context, in some context. So, here I stress the fact that the context may be bigger than the variable which explicitly appear in the formula. So, for instance, if you consider the formula true, you don't consider only once, but you consider it for all possible choices of a finite family of variables. Yes, here I write that, but I should say that it is not exactly true because I want to consider as equivalent two formulas in the context of two family of variables which are the same after changing the name of the variables. Okay, for instance, if you have a formula phi of x, and you just replace the letter x by y, you want to consider phi of x and phi of y to be equivalent. Okay, so this is formulas up to the equivalence relation defined by the possibility to change the name of the variables. Then we need to define what is a morphism from a formula to another formula. So we have two formulas, phi and psi, and as we just said that the objects here are the same, they do not depend on the name of the variables, we can suppose that the variables, the set of variables which appear here and there are disjoint. So what will be a morphism? It will be a formula in the combined set of variables x and y. So does it have to be understood just as a graph? You see, if you have an object defined by equations in the variable x, an object defined by equations in the variable y, we want a morphism to be defined as an equation in the variables x and y, verifying the graph conditions. So, what are the graph conditions? In fact, there are 3 of them. So these are the formulas here, which are so-called provably functional in T. So what does it mean? It means the following. First, of course, I want the graph to project onto the domain on the codomain. Okay, so it is completely obvious. So what does it mean? I want theta to imply in x and y phi combined with psi. If I have an element of the graph, an element x, y of the graph, I want it to project on the domain for the variable x and to project on the codomain for the variable y. So I certainly want this. Then I want any element of the domain to have an image. So what does it mean? It means I want phi in the variable x to imply this. Okay, so the meaning of that is the fact that anything in the domain has an image through theta. Okay? It's just the usual properties. It is what we would write in the set theoretic context. But here, all of this has a meaning in an arbitrary topos. And the last condition is the fact that the image is unique. So what does it mean? It means that if I consider theta of x, y, and theta of x, y prime, you see here I consider a different family of variables, but this is the same x. And I want this to imply in x, y, and y prime the condition that y is equal to y prime. So this is the fact the image is unique. So here I have defined morphism. Yes, here I used, you see, here I have written implications. So what does it mean? I want this on true, on these 3 implications to be true in the theory T. But I remind you that the theory T consists in a set of axioms. So does it mean that these implications belong to the axioms? Not exactly. Because in a theory, of course, you have axioms and you have a much larger class of implications, which are the sequence which can be proved from the axioms by the usual logical inference rules. When we have axioms, we know how to combine them. So for instance, we know that if property P1 implies P2 and P2 implies P3, then P1 implies P3. And this type of things. So there is a whole set of inference rules, the so-called Aristotle or logic, which in mathematics was formalized by Hilbert. So people call it also Hilbert, the Hilbert deductive system, how to deduce, to prove things starting from axioms. Okay, so I want these 3 things to be provable in the theory T. And of course, here also there is a notion of equivalence relation. I consider 2 formulas, theta and theta prime. There is an equivalence relation. I say that theta is equivalent to theta prime if theta implies theta prime, and theta prime implies theta. So if these two sequences are provable in the theory, I consider the formulas theta and theta prime to be equivalent. And the morphism are the equivalent classes of such formulas. Okay, so here I have already written I have already written the definition of the syntactic theory, and the only missing thing is the definition of the topology. Yes?
You're writing a simple topology, but you're taking models in some category.
Excuse me? Yeah?
You're taking models of your theory in some category, right?
Yeah, but here I am at the syntactic level. Here there is no, the only, I am building a category.
Okay,
But you see, the objects of this category are formulas, and the morphism are formulas.
yes, it's not related to the definition, just in general, when you see models.
Yeah, but the symbol equality is part of the relation symbols.
Yes, but if you're saying that axioms are satisfied in the model, then you mean that it's an actual equality or a price.
No, equality will mean, you see, this is always, when you interpret formulas, you are always building sub-objects. So this is an equality of sub-objects. And the sub-object of an object always consists in a set. So the notion of equality is a set, is perfectly clear. And okay, so here we have defined the syntactic category, and by now we need to define the syntactic topology. Okay, so we need to consider a family of morphism theta I of xi y. So they go to psi of y, and here the object they are phi i's of xi's. Okay, so you consider such a family, and you wonder when we would want to say that this family of morphism is covering for the J topology, for the syntactic topology. And the definition is the following. You say it is JT covering if and only if the following is verified. You want psi to imply the following. So here you take a disjunction over all elements of I. You see all the indexing elements. There exist xi's such that theta I of xy y is true. So this has to be T provable. So if this property is provable in the theory T, you say that this family is a cover of this object for the topology T. Once again, you use only, everything here is at the level of syntax. So by now, in fact, it is a good exercise to verify that what we have defined here is a category, and what we define here is a Grothendieck topology. It verifies the axioms of Grothendieck topologies. So there is an associated topos, and you verify that this topos is universal. So it verifies a statement in the theorem. But you see that everything is explicit. I also talked about the universal object of the classifying topos, which I had denoted UT. So this also is explicit, because here we have the syntactic category CT, and we have the canonical morphism to ET. which we had, so this is the composite of the Yoneda morphism and the Schieffification functor. Here we have a very important property, which is the fact that the Grothendieck topology, the syntactic topology on CT is always subcanonical. So this means that this morphism is always a fully faithful embedding. And it happens that the universal object here comes from CT. In fact, the universal model is already defined as a model of T in the category CT. And this model is very easy to define. So first we need to associate an object to any sort A. So here I am defining UT. So to any sort A, I need to associate an object. An object should be a formula. So what it is the formula true in a variable indexed by X, by A. Okay, and by now, if here I have a formula phi of X, I know how to interpret it. I need to, if I have such a provably functional formula, theta of X, Y, no, excuse me. This is the opposite. So if I have here a symbol, function symbol f from A1, AN to B, I want to interpret that as I want to associate to that a provably functional formula. So the formula is very simple. It is YB equal f of x1 A1 xn AN. So it is completely obvious. In some sense, it is abstract nonsense. It is completely tautological. So here, just by this recipe, this obvious recipe, you associate a model of the theory T in the category CT. You take its image by L, and what you get is a universal model. But so this construction is so it is completely explicit. So for instance, I can give a few comments. So, for instance, think about suppose you have a field, a base field K, and you are interested in the algebraic closures of K. So this means you are considering the theory of algebraic closures of K. It can be phrased as a first-order geometric theory. So, what is an algebraic closure of K in the usual sense? It is just a set-theoretic model of this theory. And you know that, except for very few cases, such as Q, we don't know to prove the existence of algebraic closures without the axiom of choice. So this means that the existence of points of the classifying topos is not constructive at all, and it depends on the axiom of choice. But here, what you can do is to consider this classifying topos, which is completely constructive, as you see, because you first construct the syntactic category, which is explicit, the syntactic topology, which is explicit. You have the associated classifying topos, and inside the associated classifying topos, you have a universal object, which is also completely explicit. So this means there is a universal algebraic closure of K, which is constructive.
Is the classifying topos of the closure the same thing as B of the Galois?
Yeah, I will come to that on my last lecture. So this, of course, will be very important. In fact, thanks to this theory, we can associate to any theory, to any first-order geometric theory, topos, which incarnates its mathematical content, and by now, this simple fact entails, I would say, a new classification of theories, depending on the properties of their classifying topos. For instance, a very important class of theories consists in theories whose classifying toposes are of presheaf type, which means are equivalent to the topos of presheaves on some category without topology. One can call that discrete toposes, if you want. In fact, it was proved a long time ago by Loweir, in fact, even before this whole theory was developed, that for any algebraic theory, its classifying topos is of presheaf type. But there are many more theories than, which are of presheaf type than algebraic theories. And in fact, theories of presheaf type share most usual properties of algebraic theories. And I will say more about that in the last lecture. Another point I will mention in the last lecture is the following. So when you are studying a theory, a very interesting property of such a theory is a property that this theory is complete. So what does it mean? It means that for any formula expressible, let's say any first-order formula, in the signature of the theory, either it is provably true or it is provably false in the theory. So what does it mean? It means that, in particular, that for any model that all models of the theory verify the same properties. And in fact, for instance, the theory of algebraic closures of a field are complete theories. Why are they complete? They are complete because their classifying topos is Galois. Their classifying topos is of the form, the classifying topos of a topological group. And it is a general fact that when the classifying topos of a theory is Galois, it is the classifying topos of a topological group, then this theory is automatically complete. And in fact, this is a very interesting fact, because when you are usually working in logic, it is usually very hard to prove that a theory is complete in this sense. But here, this property, I just said that this property is implied by a geometric property, and this is much more manageable. And in fact, I will state a theorem tomorrow by Olivia Caramello, which in fact gives extremely general conditions for the classifying topos of a theory to be Galois. Okay, so this is a very important class of theories. Yeah?
You call it Galois if it is...
Yeah, this is the definition. I call a theory Galois. You see, first there is a definition for toposis. A topos is Galois when it is equivalent to the classifying topos of a topological group. A topos is a presheaf topos when it is equivalent to the topos of presheaves on a category. Which, in fact, it may happen that you construct a topos in a topological way, depending, you see, with a true site, a category and a topology, which is completely non-trivial, and the topos you construct in this way happen to be equivalent to the topos of presheaves on another category. In fact, it is very important when we have such type of equivalences. It may happen that a topos which is constructed in a continuous way happens to appear discrete when presented in another way. Okay, so there is a new typology of theories which is yielded by this theory of classifying toposes. So the last statement I want to give before ending this third part is the following. It is a strong form of completeness. So this is the following. You take a signature on an arbitrary geometric theory T, and you consider an arbitrary sequence with two geometric theories here. And here you see that when we consider such a sequence, we may wonder whether it is provable in the theory T. So you see, this is a logical notion. Provable means it is implied by the axioms using inference rules. And the other property you may be interested in is the fact that it is verified by all models of T, models of T in sets, in toposes. Okay, so you see these two notions are a priori different. Of course, if something is provable in the theory, it will be verified by all models. But the converse direction is a true question. And here we have a following theorem. We have a theorem which is just a consequence, in fact, of the explicit construction of the classifying topos we have made. It is the fact that such sequence is provable, let's say T provable in the theory T, if and only if it is verified by the universal model. So this is a very strong form of equivalence between syntax and semantics. So, and in fact, this theorem has a consequence. Suppose by now that, so we make an extra hypothesis. Here this theorem is completely general. It is always true. But by now we make an extra hypothesis, which is the fact that the classifying topos of ET has enough points. Or, if you prefer, the collection of points is conservative. What does it mean? It means that if you have an euro in the topos, it is an isomorphism if and only if it is an isomorphism through all points, by pullbacks through all points of the topos. Of course, if it is an isomorphism in the topos, it induces an isomorphism at all fibers. But the reverse property is not true in general, but it is verified by some toposes. And in fact, if you look in SGA 4, you have a general theorem of Deligne, which tells you that if a topos is coherent, so with, in fact, most toposes in geometry are coherent, so I don't say what it means exactly. If a topos is coherent, then it has enough points and this property is verified. So suppose here that the classifying topos of the theory you are considering is coherent. Then it implies that a sequent is provable in the theory if and only if it is verified by all set-theoretic models. And in fact, this theorem, the theorem I just cited, has been proved by Gödel several decades before for so-called first-order coherent theories. Not exactly, okay, so it is a theorem of Gödel proved by purely logical means that first-order coherent theories, you see with only finite axioms, you don't allow infinite disjunctions. For such a theory, then a sequent is provable in the theory if and only if it is verified by all set-theoretic models. But so what you see presently is that thanks to the notion of classifying topos, this theorem of Gödel is equivalent to the theorem of Deligne in SGF4 50 years ago, that any coherent topos is equivalent, has enough points. In fact, the two theorems are equivalent. It works in both directions. Here I can give you some funny information, which is just a few years ago, the question was asked to Deligne, did you know that your theorem in SGA was equivalent to Gödel's completeness theorem? And he didn't know. So this is just an illustration of the lack of communication between geometers and logicians. Okay, so the last point I want to make is the following. Here we have said that for any geometric theory there is an associated topos. But I already said, and it is important, that any topos can be presented as a classifying topos of some first-order theory. So how to do it? Suppose you have a topos E0, and you want to express it as a classifying topos of some first-order theory. So this means you are interested into morphism from E to E0, and you would want to interpret that as the models of some theory in T. But what do you know? We already said that this, to consider such a morphism, is equivalent to consider a so-called flat G continuous functor. Here, you write this as the topos associated to some site Cj. So this is equivalent to so-called flat G continuous functor from C to E. And here you realize that the theory of flat G continuous functors is expressible as a first-order geometric theory. And you are done. So this means that any presentation of your topos by a defining site allows you to express this topos as the classifying topos of this theory, of some theory. And you immediately see that when you consider different sites of definitions, they yield different theories. But of course, so this is a general result, but most of the time when you do that, the theory you get is huge. It has an infinite set of sorts, of symbol functions, formulas, so it is much too big. So very often in practice, when you are interested in a topos, you are interested in expressing this topos as a classifying theory of a theory, as a classifying topos of a theory which is as simple as possible. And this is always an interesting problem. And in each case, you have to work to do that, and you may get more or less simple answers. But at least as a theoretical fact, we already know in a constructive way that any topos can be expressed in many ways as a classifying topos of theories. Okay, and so this is the end of my talk. I am already late, and but I had begun with a delay. And the last lecture tomorrow will be about making use of the fact that when you consider a topos, it is not presented in a canonical way by some site or by some theory, but on the opposite, it can be it can always be presented by infinitely many sites and infinitely many theories. So there is an ambiguity in the theory of toposes, and in fact, this ambiguity is not at all a problem. On the opposite, it is a source of, in fact, a new theory to be developed, which in fact is, I think, extremely interesting. And in fact, this is what interests me in this theory, because it allows, just by definition, to develop a theory of relations between the mathematical contents of different theories. And this is what is the most interesting thing in this setup. Okay, thank you.